All right, so the first thing that I get to do, being the last speaker, is I get to thank the organizers of the event, not just Tomas, but also Pavel and Dita. I mean, they have done so much work, and I mean, even the email communication just with me was probably, I don't know, 30 or 40 hours worth of work. So can we thank them, please? So, Tracy and I have been practicing our Czech phrases, and I wanted to give you the traditional Czech welcome. I don't know how to pronounce it, but maybe one of the native speakers of Czech will help me out with it.
A moje vznášedlo je plné úhořů. But I don't think it's traditional Czech welcome.
It doesn't mean that. I was playing around. This is an old Monty Python joke about the hovercraft being full of eels, and I love it. When I really was going to try to say something in Czech, and I just couldn't manage it, so I thought I will go back to the hovercraft and the eels. I do have to make two notes. When you direct a Center for Academic Integrity, you have to be really careful about acknowledgments and things like that. So I do want to say that some of this material has been presented in other forums elsewhere. Some of it has been developed collaboratively in ways that I can't even remember, but I know that there were many conversations and many development sessions for some of it. And some of it is copyrighted material that is permitted under educational fair use. However, it means that I can't distribute this. I can't publish it. You know, I mean, the cartoons that are in here belong to somebody else, and I have credited them, but they do belong to somebody else. And even the Brno Dragon on the front page, that is a Wikimedia file, and I did credit the author, even though it turned out to be really small. So, what do we do at the International Center for Academic Integrity? Well, we spend our entire lives trying to catch and punish students. No, we do not do that. If that was my job, I couldn't get up in the morning if that was actually my job. Instead, we have two goals, and I love the name of our organization because it puts them in the order that they're actually important to us. The first goal is education, so the academic part of academic integrity. And then the second part is cultivation and development of integrity. Those things turn out to be necessary for a just and sustainable world. And that's actually, I think, what brings us here. I mean, it is right now a very trendy thing to talk about plagiarism, but it's also the case that if we can't trust the integrity of our educational system, we don't know what people are learning, we don't know that our accreditations of people are correct, we don't know that we can trust anything in the whole educational system without integrity. So it's really important to a just and sustainable world that we have those things. Here's another thing that's really important about this, or to the Center for Academic Integrity, is that preventing cheating and developing integrity are not the same thing, right? They work together, but those are not the same thing. So sometimes when we're talking about solutions, we call them solutions sometimes, that will prevent cheating in this circumstance and will prevent cheating in some other circumstance, sometimes we forget that unless we develop the capacity to make good ethical decisions for our students and for ourselves, actually, unless we develop that capacity, then once those artificial constraints are removed, they're no more inclined to do the right thing than they were before, right? That's why it's so important that the education part is in there, because if we prevented cheating, but we didn't develop those capacities, we still wouldn't have fulfilled our goal. All right, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about the center because, especially for people who have reported during this conference that their organization or their area is just getting started with this, I want to kind of let you know the trajectory that we followed, and that way maybe you can skip part of it at least. The focus of our organization when it was formed was strictly on student cheating. It was about students, it was about cheating, it wasn't about the larger academic environment, and it wasn't about the development of integrity. It was, oh my gosh, all these students are cheating, what are we going to do about all this cheating? And that's a very understandable response when you are confronted with some of the things that we've been talking about throughout the conference about how common the cheating is. It's quite predictable that that's where we would start, but that's not where we stayed, because pretty soon it became apparent that if we were going to really do something about making students more likely to choose the things that we thought that they should choose, we were actually going to have to change some of the ways that we teach. Predictably, again, you can imagine that there was some resistance to academic integrity people saying, these things that you've done forever, maybe don't do those anymore and maybe do some things a little bit differently. And I'm going to come back to that idea because we're at another one of those places where we're starting to consider some of the things that we're doing and whether or not they make sense in connection with our goal. But so we did first emphasis on student cheating, second, assignments, pedagogy, teacher practice. The third thing that we focused on was culture. And this is where it was just getting to that place where I really thought that like focusing on culture was going to be where we stayed. I thought we've made it this far. We've taken the focus off just the students. We've taken the focus off just the teachers and their practices. We've recognized how much influence students actually have on each other and how much influence the environment one finds oneself in has to do with the choices that a person makes, right? There's some really interesting research studies, some done by Dan Ariely, and I can't remember, there was another person that he quotes, about just the effect if somebody comes in and they have a tempting situation in front of them, and on their way in, some kind of other corruption was evident to them, like maybe somebody paid a bribe on the way in, or maybe they were asked to give some money for an advantage, that completely skews whether or not that person is likely to make a bad choice or not, right? So really culture I thought was completely where we were going to stay, but now I'm really starting to wonder how much what we're dealing with and what we're fighting against has to do with our systems as well as the culture, because once we recognized the importance of culture and the importance of peers and the influence that we all exert over each other, I thought we were going to make some tremendous headway. And it turns out, at least I think it has turned out, that sometimes our systems are actually working against us. So there's this great management study, and this is a piece of research that if somebody hadn't recommended it to me, I don't think I ever would have come across my desk. That's why I actually put the title and the author up there. It's on the folly of rewarding A while hoping for B. And it's one of those articles that you read it and you're like, yep, that's what we're doing. It's all about incentives, it's all about rewards, and the misalignment of those things, how we incentivize behavior and then ask for other behavior. And that, it sheds a lot of light on the things that we are struggling with still today. So, example, our system rewards grades instead of mastery. In the form of tests, in the form of semester grades, we are all about, the numbers. And as much as we tell students, you should be improving, that's not what we do. And I have to admit that as a parent, this never occurred to me. I rewarded my kids, like when they brought home their report card, I did give them rewards based on A's. In fact, their school gave them rewards, like you can take this to McDonald's and get, some kind of terribly fattening food, or, for the number of A's on a report card. So it's society, but it's also society in the micro, right? We're all focused on these grades. It is no surprise at all that students are trying to get the A's at any cost because we have signaled to them in myriad ways that that's what's important, right? Think about how we admit them to college, how we admit them to graduate school. It's all about those grades, and sometimes the highly competitive schools, it might be several decimal places, after the whole numbers. It might be little teeny bits. So when they are grade grubbing and when they are, trying to sneak to get some kind of little advantage, we've actually incentivized exactly that, right? Here's another thing. Our system rewards product over process. Especially in English. I come from English, and we are always talking about writing being a process and the benefits of the writing process and how it's epistemic and you can learn so much and you can straighten out your thoughts and all this stuff. Primarily, there are exceptions to this, but primarily what gets rewarded in school, primary school, secondary, college, it's the product, right? So we can talk all we want about it being the process that's important and the experience and the growth and all that stuff, but if all that gets rewarded is the final product, we should not be surprised that they go to somebody else that they think is better prepared to make that final product. Okay, here's the one that actually pains me the most. That our system, even though we say, and I bet everybody in this room agrees that college especially should be a place where you grow and you stretch and you take some chances and you explore things that are unfamiliar to you, But that's not what the system rewards, right? The system rewards things like taking a class where you already know pretty much everything that's in the class, because then you don't have to put in too much work and you know you'll get an A, right? We don't have mechanisms in place for, you came from here to here, and maybe here isn't all that good, but you were way down here before. We don't have mechanisms for that, right? That's not what we reward. So it would be irrational for our students to do these things that we want them to do when the system will actively punish them for this one. If you stretch, if you take a chance, like for instance, if I were going to take a theoretical math class, that would have, it would have just shot my GPA. I'm sure it would have shot my GPA. So here's another thing that I wish that this weren't the case, but even and don't be too depressed, because I'm going to say some other stuff that's happier. I'm seeing your faces and you're all like, all right. Even in schools where we do a really, really good job, where the academic integrity policies are good and the procedures are good and the teachers are on board, it is still the case, I am sorry to report, that the risk of being caught cheating is statistically really, really low. And we know this because when we ask students about how many of them have engaged in particular kinds of behavior, between 30 and 60% tell us they do it, and then we ask teachers how many cases of cheating have you had in your class, and they're like, oh, I'm so glad to report to you I don't have any. Okay, there's a mismatch there, and again, the students, being rational, reasonably rational creatures, especially for the age group they are, it's a perverse kind of sense, but it does make sense that they would try the odds when the odds are so greatly in their favor. And then last but not least, this is going to be the last of the depressing facts, at least for a while. Some of the things that we do to try to make things better have unintended side effects that actually make them, at least in some aspects, worse. I'll give you a couple of examples. One of them is the trend from copying and pasting to the use of ghostwriters, right? I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that this is at least partially because our plagiarism detection software has gotten so much better. So the students are they're like, this isn't going to work for us anymore. How else can we avoid doing this thing that we don't want to do, or we're not prepared to do, or we don't have time to do? Well, we'll try something else, right? So that's one example. But here's another example. When we talk about cheating and how big the problem is, which we have to do, we absolutely, societally, culturally, on a global scale, we've got to recognize that we have a problem. However, when we talk about, like the number I just threw around to you guys a few minutes ago, 30 to 60% of the students will admit to cheating. Well, I didn't unpack that number for you. That means that they have admitted to doing one of those acts sometime during the last year. It doesn't mean that most of the students are cheating most of the time, but the way that we present that information leads the students to think that most of their peers are cheating, and we know that that's one of the motivations for cheating, right? They don't want to be disadvantaged when everybody else is getting this advantage. They want that advantage too. So even when we're trying to do really good things and we're being thoughtful about it and we're bringing things up that need to be brought up, still sometimes what we do has an adverse effect because of the systems that we have. Okay, so right now what we have is a situation in which often the students who break the rules, the ones who do cheat, the ones who plagiarize, the ones who collaborate when they're not supposed to, they have an advantage. And what we want to do is we want to change the system so that the people who are following the rules are actually the ones, if there's an advantage to be had, we want the advantage to go with the people who are following the rules. All right. The thing about this is the systems that we're talking about, the assessment systems, admission systems, all of those systems, they actually belong to us. Like, these are our systems. They're not easy to change. I'm not trying to paint a rosy picture of this because, as we all know, there's almost nothing more difficult to change than a university. The inertia in a university, I think it has more inertia than any other thing. It just does not want to be moved, but they can be moved. They do change. I mean, things happen, and this one is certainly worth considering, at least. Ideally, we would overhaul the whole system. Like, we could actually do things. Can you imagine a system where whatever the metric is that we use to let students into college, what if what kept them in college was actually their amount of growth, their amount of progress, like they're moving from point A to point B? Can you imagine a system like that? I mean, kind of halfway picture it, but it would be so different than the one that we have right now that all you have to do is maintain the status quo and you get to stay. Like we don't have like ongoing admission. You know what I mean? Once you're in, you can perform however poorly your institution allows you to perform and still stay there. Like what if we change that? But maybe that's too much for right now, right? This is the end of the conference session. We don't have time to solve all the problems yet. But we can at least make some changes to our own practice. And I do have to credit Jim Lang. He, at our conference last year, year before last, talked about how asking people to make great big changes is really daunting, but asking people if they might want to try little changes is a lot less daunting and a lot more manageable, and sometimes you can get significant change with little changes to your own practice. So thank you, Jim, for that. Here's some things that we could do differently, right? One of the things that we do that's problematic is we still teach as if information is the great big thing, right? It used to be the case a long time ago that students came to college because that was where all the information was. And the information was there in the form of teachers, and it was there in the form of books in the library, and it was there in the form of expertise of all sorts of kinds and lab materials. But that is not the case anymore, and we're still teaching and assessing as if it was, right? Now, the information is everywhere, right? And instead of teaching as if the information was the critical thing, you know, can you tell me this information that I just told you, which is kind of a silly thing to even ask people to do, we need to start teaching and assessing as if selecting, identifying, critiquing, analyzing, utilizing the information was the thing, because that is the thing. That's what we need people to be able to do. That's the competency we need. We do not need people who can memorize things because everybody has a cell phone, right? Okay, so to do that, and this is just one small suggestion. I knew I'd only have time really to go through one suggestion, but instead of doing the thing that advantages the people who break the rules, what if your next assignment told the students they can use anything in the world, and that includes phone a friend, they can ask their mom, whatever it is that they want to do, they can use all of that. And the final product was going to be the result of using everything, right? And you know, so if that was an in-class assignment, that would allow the use of texting and cell phones and all those things. It would be closer to a real-world scenario, and it would not disadvantage the students who are playing by the rules, right? And that's just one possible scenario. There are other ones that, and for each discipline, you'd have to discuss what would work for you. But if we start doing that, if we start looking at where the advantage and the disadvantages are, and then trying to remake things so that we actually incentivize the things we want them to do, and maybe disincentivize the things that we don't, you know, that's one little step that we could take. Those the sites that compile teachers' assignments and all the test questions and all that stuff, there are instructors right now who use those sites and say, you know, you can find all of my old tests here. Go ahead, look at the tests. These are the kind of problems you're going to get, and you probably need that preparation because my tests are really challenging. And then the students have an idea of what's going to be asked. The teacher, you know, then can be very reasonably have very reasonable expectations that they're going to know what they should have prepared for, but not the exact thing, right? So instead of trying to get rid of those sites or ban students from those sites, I'm not saying that those would be bad approaches in all cases, but we also have the choice to just say, you know what, all this stuff is out there, I'm going to direct you to it, you can use that as study material, and then we'll go on. Okay, I just was talking about that. The doing something with the information is the critical skill that they're going to need. Much of the information that they are learning from us is going to be outdated. I think somebody mentioned earlier today, or maybe yesterday, that a lot of the jobs that they're preparing for, they're not even going to be things, right? We don't need any more typewriter repairmen anymore, right? So preparing them to learn how to learn is far more important than preparing them by having them memorize things. Okay, so here's why we have to do this. One of the most important things that institutions of higher learning do right now, and I'm not saying that we should be happy that this is the most important thing that we do, but one of the things that society looks to us for is credentialing, right? We tell them, this person should know these things. This person has been through the experiences that make her qualified to be an engineer. This person has been through the experiences that make him qualified to be a doctor. We let them know what those qualifications are. And if our assessments can't be relied upon, they will find other ways to do that, right? And that's already happening. Right now, there are alternative assessments of people, badging and credentialing that happens from outside agencies. And for better or worse, that's an important service that we can do, and we currently aren't doing it up to the degree that we should be doing it. It just lacks integrity with so much cheating going on. So here's another really key point, is that one way or another, we are actually sending messages to students all the time about integrity. And a lot of people think, well, if I don't address ethics, or if I don't say anything about it, then I haven't done any harm. I haven't done any good, but I haven't at least done any harm, and I'm not an ethics scholar and all that stuff. But if we don't attend to teaching students to make better ethical decisions and letting them see that while they're becoming, that doctor, while they're becoming that engineer, this is actually part of what they need to do. If we don't say anything about it, then we're actually signaling that that's not a critical part, right? Because we're telling them all the other important stuff that they need to know if we don't attend to this. So this is two reasons that we really have to do it. Our roles as credentialers and the fact that we're giving them a message one way or another, and we want it to be a positive message that ethics are integral to the thing that they're going to be later, rather than it's something secondary that's tacked on, or maybe not even tacked on. So the point of all of this, is that we want to change our systems so that they are actually working for us instead of working against us. It doesn't make any sense, and we keep doing it, it doesn't make any sense to reward A when what you want is B. So my call to you at the end of this conference is that we try to think of some good ways that we can actually change our systems from the inside, gradually, incremental changes, starting with practice, and we can actually make this make more sense for us and for our students. Thank you very much. And there's a... Děkuji. I did it right the second time. The first one says, my penguin has the measles.
Well, it's not thank you. The penguin has some disease. I don't know what kind of disease it is.
Measles.
Measles, yeah.
That's what I asked for.
So thank you very much, and thank you so much for keeping time. We are ahead plan. Yeah, so there's